Thank you for listening to Technology Simplified, Tech Talk everyone can understand. I'm your guest host, Scott Curtis. Will couldn't be here today to host a show because he's the guest. Will began his career at IT Voice at the wee age of 5, sweeping warehouse floors and refilling the Coke machine out back. Since then, he's held just about every position in the company. This allowed him to learn every aspect of the business, from sales to accounting to operations. He officially became CEO in 2019, where he started a new growth campaign that has taken IT Voice to 8 times its original size. Will loves working with the clients directly to help them leverage technology to grow their business. He is all about providing the best customer service experience and peace of mind for our customers. Thanks for being on the show, Will.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's great to be here.
How does it feel to be in that seat?
I'm a little nervous. I'm not sure what curveball you're going to try to throw me here today, but I'm sure it'll be fun.
So a huge part of a great customer experience for our clients' customers is communication, and you really need a good phone system in order to make that communication 100%. So in keeping with that, IT Voice started out as a phone service company. We provided phones, and things have changed a lot. Can you just kind of give me a brief synopsis of how things have changed from when we started to where we're at now?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry for the listeners who are only audio, but here you can see I have one of the more original versions of a phone that, obviously we didn't sell these back in the day, but operated very differently from how they operate today. I think, when you're getting to your question in all seriousness, and those on the audio, I've got a phone from the early 1930s or 40s that's behind me here. But to get to your question, there, Scott, in terms of how things have changed, I'll even say like how we have demoed them to customers. I mean, back in the day, we would be having the physical handset. People would come to our office and we would like, hey, let us show you the feature functionality. But I remember like when caller ID was like a big deal and you had to pay extra to get caller ID, but it was always about the phone and the desktop. And now, like when we're showing customers, some of the new options, I'd say over half the time, we don't even show the customers a picture of the phone that they're buying. It's all about the online experience, and here's what you can do in the portal, and here's how you can manage things on your computer. Here's what the app looks like on your phone. So, the experience has completely changed, for our customers, from all about that physical phone sitting there to so much more and the software that powers the voice solutions.
That's great. Now, I run into a lot of clients and just people in business that have had the same phone system for 15 or 20 years. And when I talk to them, they don't know the first thing about what to do when they're looking for a phone. They've heard all these terms out there like cloud-based and VoIP and things like that. What would you recommend that somebody who's looking for a new phone system, what should they be looking for, and what types of terminology are they going to hear when somebody's talking to them about a phone system?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Scott. And I think one of the biggest kind of mistakes, that I see that people make when they enter into it is that, especially if it's been even 5 years ago, but especially if it's been 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of the customers I talk to, it seems like that they're approaching that decision in a similar sort of way, and as me as a decision maker in our business, I have to make recurring decisions. Every 5 years I'm looking at some contract. And so a lot of times I approach it the same way as I did before. And you kind of go through that checklist of different things and considering your options to figure out, what you want to do. And so a lot of times those, decision makers are approaching it like they did last time, and they kind of get confused in the process. They think, okay, well, I just need to get a new phone system and we can keep rocking and rolling. I've done this 2 or 3 times before over the last few decades, and not realizing how incredibly different, phone systems are today versus what they used to be. It used to be that you would have a physical box that you would buy. It would go back in some closet. That would be connected to some phone lines from somebody like an AT&T out there. You have a T1 line or whatever it might be, even if you had some SIP trunks on it. And then all of your phones in your office would connect to that system. And so now today, that system is in the cloud. And instead of buying lines, you're buying like seats or users that are now utilizing that. And so a lot of times people, they come into it and, we even have to teach our sales team here of like, hey, just because a customer says, I want like a phone system in the closet, we got to make sure we educate them about the options that are available and make sure that that's the right one. And so I see them as a mistake. People are like, okay, I've got, this many phones, I've got this many lines. I need to just replace what I've got with something new that's not about to die. And then they don't really stop and pause and say, well, how should I do this? And kind of start from scratch. Sometimes you don't need as many users, and maybe you don't need as many physical phones. And there's just a whole, it's so much has changed that when you enter that decision, you should really stop, get with somebody that's, familiar with it and help them, get them to help walk you through that process and really completely rethink how you do your communication. I mean, at the end of the day, you need people that are going to answer the calls when the customer rings in. That stays the same. But there's a lot of different ways to do that can create, like you mentioned in the intro, create that best customer experience for your customer when that happens and get the calls to the right people as fast as possible. And there's a lot of really neat ways to do that today, leveraging some of the new technology. So that would be the biggest thing that I would tell somebody just entering into it is like, hey, you need to, really look at all that. To get to your question, about some of the terms. So, people don't really use the term like phone system as much, anymore because there's not really like a system. So probably the term that's used the most is UCaaS, which is capital U, capital C, lowercase a, and then capital S, which stands for Unified Communications as a Service. And so that's what a lot of times people, will refer to it. Some people will call it hosted PBX or hosted phones or hosted phone system, or cloud phones or cloud phone system, something along those lines in terms of what people say. So those are some of the terms, that you might hear out there.
Very good information. One of the things that you mentioned a couple times was users. Now, in the old style phone systems, you really had two types of users. You had your receptionist, who was kind of the person who answered the phone, and they had a special phone, and then everybody else was the other one. And now I know that with new technology, things have changed so that you can have a lot of different types of users. Can you go into some of the ways that you can, well, first of all, have a lot more functionality for certain users, and then the users who don't need that functionality maybe save a little bit of money?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a really hard question to answer, Scott, because of the number of providers out there, and there's no back in the day, it was like you said, hey, you had kind of your standard user. Maybe you picked which phone model that they had and how many buttons and if it was color or not or whatever. And then you had like your receptionist who, would have, a lot of buttons on their phone and, maybe have some sort of, attendant type of thing that they, console that they would use to be able to, especially if you had hundreds or thousands of employees, that they would be able to, attendant console that they'd be able to look up people's names and all those kinds of things. And now, depending on which of the providers that you're going to, they may have standard users, limited users, call center users, mobile only users, or, any other, advanced users, like all, there's so many different terms that are out there. And different ones mean different things by them and different things, are included. So, to try to maybe answer. So what I would tell somebody is try to understand what parts are included with those different user seats, and then think about what does each user need. And so some of those parts to consider is like, okay, first of all, do they need a physical like phone? Like we sometimes refer to it as a desk phone. So do they need, that or not? And sometimes like when people get started, they say, oh, I've got this, chunk of my users who don't really use their desk phone anymore. And maybe there's some savings there of like, maybe, I've got 100 employees and last time we did this, we got 100 phones. But do we need 100 this time? And the answer may be no, maybe you don't need, that many this time. I would also, but just because they don't need a physical phone doesn't mean you don't want them on your system. So they even, some people call them like phantom users. So they can be in there, they can be found, they'll be in the directory, but that call might ring out to an app that's on their phone. It might even ring like to their cell phone. There's all different ways to, potentially, have those calls, routed to them. So you've got some different options there. So kind of start with like, okay, who do we need on the system that when calls come in, we want calls to be able to get routed to, whether a customer is having a directory that they're through, whether it's internal calls that are happening or it's coming into, maybe you're in a model where you've got a traditional receptionist and they're transferring and need to be able to transfer, easily. So you got to consider first, like who all even needs to be on the system and why or why not. So kind of start there and then figuring out, okay, do they need that desk phone? Do they need to have mobile access or not? Sometimes mobile access is included like with certain seats that the provider has. Sometimes it may not. Sometimes it may be an upcharge to have that. And so I can't really like give you like an answer of like, yeah, dude, here's the difference between these different ones. So you figure out, okay, desk phone, mobile, then you figure out like a lot of times referred to as like a portal or desktop, like on the computer, do you have access to the portal to be able to control the phone and do different things, because you might be able to have a seat that only has a physical phone and doesn't have any of the software functionality that might be cheaper. Or you might have one, that's only used, on the mobile app. And then you get into your higher end users where like, okay, you have a call center user. And so a call center user could be in a, in those different queues and, be able to have all the call center metrics and reporting on how long people are on hold and what's the abandon rate, and down that you've got, like a call center, supervisor that's actively looking at those and needing to run reports. And so you really like, especially if you're getting like that call center, sometimes that gets really confusing and you really need to be specific in that to figure out like, what are the reports that you need to run? Because especially if it's a smaller type business, they may kind of think that they need the call center. But the reality is maybe a standard or an advanced user might have the reporting that they need, and they may not need like those active, full-blown call center feature functionality. And they might also need that. So, you want to kind of figure out like what is really included with this and what are you trying to accomplish with each of your users to figure out, okay, which type of seat or which type of user, do I want? To your point in the question, though, there are some ways to be able to save money in that, by making sure you get the right fit for what you need and not paying for more than what you're going to use.
Right. And one of the things that I've noticed in folks that have an older phone system is they really need to have somebody guide them through this because the change has been so huge that it's almost, you can't even think of it in an incremental type way. It went from this to this, and now you really need to almost be educated on it before you even can start looking for a phone system.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would almost, we're not quite there with cars, but my dad has a Tesla and I've driven it a handful of times, and it is very, very different from operating a traditional gas, powered vehicle like, that I'm still stuck with. Now, obviously, the electric car is not kind of the standard, thing like, it has gotten with, hosted phones these days.
Right.
But it's kind of that sort of difference. If you've ever been in those, it's like, you don't really start the car and, when you let your foot off the gas, it automatically starts to slow down, if you're not, there's just so much stuff, and if you went into a Tesla dealership and like, well, how many cylinders are in this? Or what's the mile per gallon? If you started asking all those traditional sort of car buying questions, then you wouldn't get any answers. And, you have to fundamentally understand, hang on, it accomplishes the same purpose, which is getting you from point A to point B, but it does it in a very different way. And so you really kind of have to start from scratch in terms of how you evaluate it and the questions that you ask.
Yeah. That's a good story. My son has a electric car, and for my wife to drive it, he has to engage the brake system because she just can't get used to taking her foot off the gas and stopping. So you can do a manual braking system on it, and
That's good. That's good to know, because I think my wife was about to kill me the first time we were in it, because every time I'd let my foot off the gas to coast, it was like, you gotta jerk forward or whatever, because it would immediately start slowing down. So you got to learn how to operate it. So
yeah, for sure. Now, the one thing that is true of all the modern phone systems is that they use your internet to connect. How much internet do I need to be able to power my phone system and do my business at the same time?
that's a great question. And I will say on that point too, that it is significantly different now than what it was even 3, 4, and especially like 5 years ago. So, some of the, customers I'll talk to, maybe that got burned by VoIP at some point in the past. They tried it early on, especially it was like 10 years ago, you tried it like, that was crap. It didn't work. And so then they kind of think VoIP doesn't work. I'm not doing that. I don't want that level of customer experience. Things have changed tremendously. And two big things have changed. One, internet speeds just on average have gotten significantly faster than what they were. And two, the technology that is able to use lower bandwidth has gotten significantly better. And I've been surprised on our team, the number of times we're like, the team's kind of been like, I don't know if it's going to work on that connection, maybe in a rural area. And it's even like some old school, like DSL or whatever. And it works and minimal, problems with it. So that's not a guarantee that it can work anywhere. But I mean, it's been a long time, Scott. I mean, it's probably been a year or two since I've really heard from our team of like, hey, we couldn't make it work, on a connection. Now, there's things to do, because really at this point, the voice uses so little bandwidth. That's really not even like a question anymore. The real question is, how do you protect the bandwidth that it needs? So you couldn't really buy an internet connection that would be so slow that the voice couldn't operate, on it. It's really what could become the problem is if other traffic is able to run over it. So imagine like, hey, you got a highway that's going down there and you got all these, semi trucks, and let's call the semi trucks, YouTube, that's people are, using all this, bandwidth, for video. And so like, if that runs the voice off the road, then that obviously becomes a problem. And so there's different things that we can do from a technology perspective. And, have you ever been in a city that's got, like those toll lanes or something like that, over to the left, and it's got a barricade that, keeps the traffic from coming over, or those HOV lanes or whatever they're called. So that's what we can do, is kind of set up a dedicated lane for the voice. And so that way that the other traffic doesn't run it off the road and cause, voice issues.
Great. Now, what happens if my internet just gets cut?
So if your internet, it gets completely turned off or has some issues. I mean, that's a great, valid point. So I would say two things on that. So that's a big concern a lot of people have. But in the old school way, if you had a traditional phone system, you also had those phone lines that were also susceptible to getting cut and getting turned off as well. And so to some extent, that problem is not exclusive to it being on the internet. And so, even in the old scenario, you had, same issue. The benefit of a cloud type of solution, though, is that it can immediately recognize that those calls are no longer be able to route to your phones because your internet's off, and it automatically can be programmed to have a failover mechanism in place. So if you had multiple offices, you could say, hey, if that office goes down, we want the calls to automatically route to another office, that we can continue to answer those customer, calls that are coming in, and have some sort of, message that those calls know, oh, hang on, customer A or location A is down, and now these calls are rolling over to us. You can have like direct calls ring, out to your cell phone. And you can also, in your call routing on an individual level, you could say, hey, I want to always ring the app as well as my phone, or I only want to ring the app when my phone's not working. So you can have different things set up, to be able to work. When COVID hit, we had a lot of our customers who just unplugged the phone and, took it home with them, was able to plug it in at home and work. So that is also an option where you can take, that phone. Now, I do need to have a big disclaimer about 911 in that. So, the VoIP phones the physical phones are not far enough along that they know when they've been moved. So if we provision a phone for somebody's office and all of a sudden they go home and they unplug it, they'll take it home and they get it plugged in their internet and they have power for it and everything, it'll work and work pretty well. But that phone will think that it's still at the office location. And so heaven forbid something happened and you pick up that phone and you dial 911, now, of course, the emergency person is going to ask you to verify your address and all those kinds of things. But the address that would show up would be that office address for whatever the phone was originally programmed for, and, could potentially send emergency services to the wrong location, which in emergency obviously could be, devastating. Right. So do be mindful of that if you do ever move a VoIP phone. And a really quick thing you can do, 933, you can dial that on your phone and it will actually give you a recording from the phone company that will tell you what your address is. So even if you're working at home right now listening to this, pick up your phone, dial 933, and it gives an address other than the address of where it's located. Then you can let the provider know, hey, I need to change the 911 address, for this device so it is the correct one. So real easy check that anybody can do. And also on the mobile app, if you try to dial 911 from the mobile app, then it will actually not use the mobile app. It'll actually, the iPhone, Android will actually reroute the call to go out your cell phone. And then the cell phone will then relay your GPS coordinates, assuming it can do that and everything, to emergency services. So, if you're on the app, you're pretty much safe, because it's kind of, protection proof. But if you have that physical phone, do be careful, about 911 if you move around. Kind of went a long way off your question of if you have internet, go out. But there you go.
Well, and I'm glad you talked about the 933 thing, because that's something I didn't know. So I'm going to actually check that here. I really like that. So what I'm getting here is that the change has been so monumental that when you are deciding to replace your phone system, you're going to have a lot of questions, and you really need somebody that's going to take you by the hand and help you. What types of what should you look for as a business owner in a phone provider with technology the way it is now?
Yeah, so a couple of different things I would start off with. I think let's start with pricing first of all, because I think that's always obviously business, decision makers is a big question in their mind. And so a lot of times, and I kind of hit on this a little bit before, but old school, you would pay like a capital expense for the phone system, or maybe you had it on a lease or whatever, but there was kind of like a fixed cost for that. And then maybe there was some ongoing maintenance and stuff like that to maintain it. And then you'd have this big cost of phone lines connected to the system. And so a lot of times people entering into is like, well, how many lines do I need? How much are the lines? And kind of asking those kind of questions. And the new version, when you've got a cloud-based system, like the lines are unlimited in the back end. And so you don't even have to worry about those questions. And that's not even something like you pay for. The way you pay for the new type of system is on a per user basis. And so going back to the question, we talked about all the different types of users. Each of those users have a different cost associated with them. And so that determines, what, the total cost is going to be. So we already spent some time talking about all that. So, looking at that from a price. So that's one of the first things that, I would look at, as a business decision maker. We talked about some of those things about like, how many users do I need? What type of users? All of that, comes to play, into, the questions that you need. I think one of the things that I would think about the most is not how do I replicate what I have now into a cloud system, but what should I have the use of the phone be? And so even a lot of times, like what we love to do is not only talk to the decision maker, but to talk to the various different users and managers and key players in the company that especially are customer facing in that interaction, and looking at like, what is that customer experience? And when they call in, what happens? My general rule of thumb is, how do we get the call to be answered by the right person in the shortest amount of time? That creates the best customer experience, right? When I call a company, when that call, like if it could be answered in 3 seconds and it's the person that has, the answer to my question, I'm the happiest, right? If I call in, I got to go through a ton of different menus, or I call in and talk to somebody and they transfer me to somebody else and somebody else. Those are, what creates a poor customer experience. And so I think, kind of starting at, all right, what do I want my customer experience to be? What are the complaints from customers now? What's working now that I'm doing that I like? What do I not like? And kind of starting internally, just figuring out like, who are we as a company and who do we want to be from a communication perspective? And then now when you're talking to, a company like us that is, helping you navigate through, what kind of system and seats and all those kinds of things, you're educated to be able to say like, hey, this is what this is what we're doing now. These are some things maybe we could change, and even get, input from the provider about, hey, how could you accomplish some of those goals from a customer experience perspective to overall make that better? So that would be kind of the biggest thing that I would look at, versus just like, all right, we got this, let's just replace it and do the exact same thing. There's an opportunity to rethink some things from a business process perspective.
Right. And sounds like you could streamline and get better through a new phone system.
Yeah. And even cool little things like, if a customer calls in and then hangs up before you can get to them, like we've done some things for customers. You could send that number a quick text and say, hey, I saw you call. Like there's the one customer we did this. If a call came in and was longer than 10 seconds, and so that like if it hangs up in 2 seconds, maybe it was a wrong dialed number or a telemarketer or something like that, right? But it's like, hey, they waited for at least 10 seconds, so the probability of a legit customer is higher. But it was too long to where we didn't answer the phone or get somebody on the line they were holding or whatever it was. And so we sent them a quick text that says, hey, sorry, saw you called, we couldn't get to you. Is there something that we can do to help you? And then if they reply back, then all of a sudden you got somebody gets a message on the other end and could call the customer back or re-engage with them. All sort of different call reporting that you could do that maybe you don't have now. So you want to see which of your agents, or customer service people or salespeople, whatever, like, what are they doing? How many calls? How long? Listen to the calls. There's a lot of things that you used to have to pay extra for, that are now included as more standard type features. And so that's what I'm really kind of talking about, like looking at how can we make this experience better and not assume that it's out of your price range. Like in a lot of the stuff that we sell, like our standard seat, includes a lot of stuff, and it's very affordable. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times, Scott, that we literally are saving customers money on their monthly expenses and getting everybody, maybe not all full call center, but like pretty close to full call center functionality, and the customer's got so much that they can do and so much value to run their business.
Wow, that's great information. And it sounds like if you've got an older phone system, even 5 years old, it's time to maybe start looking at what might actually enhance your business.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Will, for giving up the host spot and being a guest. You're a good guest too. You're a great host. You're a great guest.
You gave me some softballs, so I appreciate that.
Technology Simplified is tech talk everyone can understand. Hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all the latest tech news, free of jargon and undefined acronyms. Join us next time as we discuss VPNs versus SharePoint.